Hello, 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 and welcome to my sister and I. I'm joined by my beautiful, wonderful sister, Toa.
And I'm here with the lovely, so wise Lilia.
I think I get thrown off when you pay me compliments. It takes me a
Why?
second to process.
Normalize getting compliments.
Uh,
Normalize accepting compliments.
yeah, but I can accept them just from you. I'm like, oh. I
Why is
get a bit
that?
hot and bothered. I don't know. I get a bit
What?
hot and bothered. I'm just like, oh my God, what's happening here?
That's so funny. Why'd you get bothered? Don't get bothered.
I
It's
don't
only
know.
me.
I don't know. Okay, so welcome to our show. Um, Today we'll be talking about identity, and then seeing where that takes us.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Excited about this topic. There's so much to dive into. I'm not sure if half an hour is enough time.
Well, whatever is left over, we can always come back to more episodes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I actually want us to think about identities beyond the obvious, like
Mm,
gender and race. So I think or even identities that aren't visible to other people.
like sexual orientation? Question mark.
Yeah, like that. Yeah. Yeah, let's start
Mm,
there. What do you identify then
what do I
as?
identify? Well,
Because
um,
that
what do I identify as? I mean,
mm.
I don't know. I always find that question, the way that wording like that, like a bit. But I guess how do you? Anyway, I identify as queer. Queer. Yeah, I identify as queer.
And when did you
I
have that
always find it really.
realization?
When did I have that realization? I think I was able to put the language to it a few years ago, um, because I've never liked labels. I've never ever. I've always felt like.
Oh,
Ah.
this that sentence reminds me of some corporate marketing. Labels belong on bottles, on our vodka bottle. Labels are not for people.
I mean, once the
Oh, I
corporate
hate
world
stuff
starts
like
to
that.
use language like that, it's a bit like, oh my gosh, what even are you saying?
Yeah,
But
I know. What does this mean?
yeah, because I mean, I understand and I see the use in labels in some spaces, I really do, but then I don't know. It just feels like a box. It feels like a box. You've been put into a box.
Okay, I don't think labels are bad. Labels help us understand things and people and the
Mm,
world, but you should only use that as the basis of the understanding. But
yeah.
you shouldn't also rely on that label to define a person. So it's kind of
Mm,
like what's the word? The word's not coming to me. But you have to use labels in a thoughtful way,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Because I think sometimes people do really use the labels as their personality, you know? Um,
Yeah.
and then not only that, but even the way that they're then perceived by others, the way that we're then perceived, because obviously once you have a label, like, I mean, what comes to mind is like labeling a cup. You won't then expect the cup to do things that a cup shouldn't do,
Mm.
you know? So it can be quite limiting, because we're more than these labels. We're more than, um, we're more than the labels. Because I
So
think,
what is that more than that we are beyond the labels?
mm, that's quite a philosophical question, because then we could go really deep into that. Um, Beyond that, we're limitless, we're boundless,
Yes,
we
yes.
are.
Yes.
We are spirits. We're spirits having a physical experience. We're awesome. Yeah, we're awesome. But
Yes,
sometimes
yes.
if you're then put into a label, you forget everything of what we are and focus on the fact that we're this label. Um,
Mm.
yeah, like I understand, because the thing is with labels, what's interesting is that when someone When someone calls me a lesbian,
I was not expecting that sentence. That's so funny.
do you know what? It's because these labels conjure up images in our heads, and I'm just like,
When someone calls you a lesbian, right? Okay, that's not what I was expecting this morning, but yeah, that word is so loaded. I think.
isn't it just? Okay.
That's so
When
funny.
you think of the word lesbian, what comes up to mind? Like, what do you think a lesbian looks like? What's a lesbian to you?
What's lesbian? I just think of lesbian porn. That's it. Or you just think of like, somebody that's butch. That's it.
Mm.
Because I remember at school it was definitely an insult
Oh yeah,
to call somebody a lesbian. So it's like you
yeah.
don't want to be associated with that.
Or carpet munch.
Yeah. So do you identify as queer because you don't want the label of lesbian?
I mean, I'm not a lesbian, but when people who don't understand LGBT,
Why do I think of a lizard person when I think of the word lesbian? It's like that. It's really it's ringing in my ears. So I'm thinking of lizard. You know when people say, "Oh, the queen is a lizard person,"
yeah.
that should be synonymous with the queen is a lesbian. Oh my god, that's so funny.
Labels. You see, this is why labels are so funny because
Hmm.
it's what do we associate with those words? What do we associate with
Yeah.
those words? Because do you know what? I see a white butch like a white butch woman is what comes up to mind when
When
someone
you
says
think of the
lesbian.
word lesbian.
Yeah, and I'm just like,
So you don't want the stigma that's attached to the word
no, no,
lesbian
no,
to
no,
be.
no. It's not about the stigma. It's not about the stigma at all. Because again, I think labels can be quite empowering for people. Like by if hypothetically speaking, if I was a lesbian or I was and by saying, "Oh, I'm a lesbian," I feel empowered by shouting my identity. I could totally
Okay,
I
but
totally
that's
feel
what I
that.
don't get. Why are you not a lesbian?
Hmm?
Why are you not a
Because
lesbian?
lesbians stop.
For the dictionary definition of the word.
I'm not a lesbian. Why are you now? You see, this is the thing about identity. Now people are fighting. I'm telling you,
That's
I'm
so
not a
funny.
lesbian. I'm telling you, I'm not lesbian. Or like, I'm not lesbian. I'm not bisexual. I'm just queer.
Just queer. Have you seen that Google advert?
Which one?
First of all, that one that says, "Oh, it's basically a group of black boys, and their white friend comes and he says Wagwan, and then there's a voiceover that goes, no, and then there's an image of someone who's typing who can say Wagwan into Google, and then a voiceover goes, asking the right questions brings us all together. And then there's another one with Nick Grimshaw and
Oh my gosh.
what's that black presenter's name? The radio presenter. Um, what's her name? I can't remember her name.
On what radio show is she?
A BBC One. Clara Amphel.
Clara. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, Clara Amphel. Nick Grimshaw sat on the sofa, and then he asks her. They're taking it in turns, asking each other questions, and he asks her, "Why do we celebrate Black History Month or something?" And then she asks him, um, "Can I call you queer?" And I can't remember his response. No, I can't remember what it says. Oh no, yeah, something like, "Oh, only I can call myself queer, but you can't call me queer," something like that.
Yeah, because queer is also very loaded because it was also very much used as an insult. But lol to these adverts.
I know.
I guess they're trying. They're really trying. Yeah. So queer is you can't unless someone says to you that they're queer, you can't call people queer. Basically,
Mm,
you know what I mean?
okay.
Like you can't just
Yeah.
assume that someone is comfortable with being called the word queer because again, word associations. There's a lot of violence associated to that word. Um, and some people just do not want that, you know.
Yeah, but you're
Just
comfortable
understand.
with being called queer.
Yeah.
That's something new I've learnt then.
I can't stop thinking about these adverts and like what they were trying to like. I mean, I understand what
Hey,
they're trying to
you should
do, but
read the Society of the Spectacle guide board.
guide board.
Yeah,
I think I've heard of him.
Society of the Spectacle.
Okay. Book plug.
Oh,
I've got a Waterstones loyalty card, so Waterstones, hi.
do you? I
Yes,
actually
I
went to
do.
Waterstones the other day, bought some books,
Mhm.
and I thought that's a lot of money I'm paying for these books. So I left the shop, bought the books, left the shop, and looked on Amazon, and it was like nearly half the price on Amazon for 2 books. So
Oh my
I walked
god.
back in and told the girl, "Can I get a refund because I'm gonna get them on Amazon instead?" And you know what? Part of me was like, "Oh no, that's so embarrassing." But I thought
No shame.
there's no shame in saving yourself £16.
Literally, no shame at all. No shame at all. I mean, if this
There's no
and
shame.
this is how
You need to yeah, because it's actually expensive,
it's so expensive. It's
and
so
this part of me
expensive.
doesn't want to a part of me doesn't want to make what's his name, the Amazon
Jeff,
guy,
Jeff.
yeah, doesn't want me to put money in Jeff's pocket, but at the end of the day,
I think this is how
that's
he's
where
really
the
got like he's really, really he's really got it good because he offers convenience and cheap prices in a way that no one
yeah.
else does. You know what I mean?
Y-
So even when you're like you fight with all your being to be like, no.
Absolutely. And to be honest, I got to think about my pocket at the end of the day.
Literally. Let's be honest.
Oh, that's so funny.
Let's be honest. Let's
Let's
be
be
honest.
honest.
His identity as a billionaire, and
Yeah.
how like billionaires are just bad for the environment.
Okay, I was watching a video the other day, and it's like the way um the way billionaires are portrayed in
Mm,
society is so far from the truth of what they actually are. If you think of who's the guy who started Apple again? I can't remember his name.
Jobs? Question mark.
Yeah, Steve Jobs,
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. The way they started out, you have this idea of somebody working in their garage in their spare room,
Yeah.
um, and it gives people that hope that if they work hard enough, that they can
They
get
can get there.
to where they are with those humble beginnings. But actually, the truth of the matter is, how they were successful is not just based on their own ingenuity and entrepreneurship
Mm,
alone. It's like one thing that we don't know about people like Thomas Edison is you'd think that he's the person involved invented the light bulb himself. Actually, no. Thomas Edison was working in a laboratory funded by the government where he was essentially just like the head of design or head of like inventions, or I don't know
mm,
what his title was, but he was basically a glorified middle manager in something that was funded by taxpayers. But then these people who we see in society as the great person, the great man, the in history, when you actually peel back what's been taught to us and actually dive into the truth, it's like we're only told 1% of the story when
mm.
the other 98% of the story leaves out all the help that they got, all the people that helped them get to where they are, and then it gives people this hope that they also one day can become billionaires. And it's like, okay, yes, we can all attain riches and all attain a certain amount of wealth in this life, but to reach that billionaire status, billionaire point, it's never ever off the back of one person's hard work and
Mm.
grit and determination.
The
And
individualization of success.
yeah, but it's
Mm.
like no, it's not like that at all. And I think that identity as a billionaire, what we think of billionaires is completely wrong, and how they actually achieve their success.
Mm.
But when I think, oh yeah, if I was a billionaire, how would I want the world to see me, and what would I want them to think of me? I think that's a good question. Or let's say when I reach a certain level of wealth,
Mm.
how would I want others to see me?
What does it matter how others see you?
See, yeah, without ego getting involved, that inflated false sense of self,
Mm.
then it's like, oh, actually, you want to help others to get to where you are and empower people to make smart, similar decisions.
I think as well. I'm gonna go back to quite a few points that you did make, in regards to them starting out in like the garages and stuff. I think also we don't get to hear about the fact that these people were like in privileged homes and privileged circumstances where they can be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to lock myself in the garage. But if you've got like bills to pay, people to look after, this and this and this to do, it's not it's not an accessible thing for you, you know? And because even that by itself, this they relied on their parents, they relied on the wealth that their parents had accumulated and stuff. And so yeah,
Yeah, and that aspect
success is
of the
not.
story is often forgotten or not even
Mm,
included. It's like, oh yeah, let's acknowledge the privilege that you do have, and actually, when you acknowledge that privilege, help other people who might not have the same privilege to think of workarounds around their situation, and to think of ways to leverage the little privilege they may have in ways that you've seen in other people around you who've done well for themselves, but
but
not be
greed
like
and
condescending in the
exploitation.
advice that you give.
Mm. But greed and exploitation will not let anyone do that, like at
Yeah.
all. Because even if you think about like Jeff himself, Jeff, like we're besties. Hi, Jeff.
Saw him on the weekend.
He invited me to space, but I said, you know what? No. um, like if you look at the his employers, the people that work, people that actually make Amazon are the people that are in the warehouse, and those are the people that get nothing at all. And then you think, is this really how you want to navigate your riches? Is this how you want to? Because as a billionaire, how many lifetimes do you have to live in order to spend all your money?
Yeah, exactly.
Look at how far we
Yeah,
strayed from the.
exactly,
Look at
exactly.
how far we strayed. But it's okay. So and then also you talked about ego. How does ego inform our identities?
How does ego inform our identities? That's a really strong question and good question. I think it goes back to a point I made earlier. You have this false sense of self, and you want people to see you in a certain way, and actually, you see yourself in a certain way. So sometimes that ego um, forces you to act in a way that might actually not be true to who you are and what you believe in, but because you want to be perceived in a certain way by others. And I think that's where a lot of how ego is linked to identity is around um re- is around sort of thinking about other people's relationship to you. And I think if we didn't think that, then there wouldn't be so much ego and there wouldn't be so much false sense of self.
Because if you're then starting to think about how others are perceiving you, I think that the minute that even crosses your mind, I think ego's found its way there. Because I think ego is very sneaky in that
Mm,
sometimes what starts off as a honorable thing, sometimes that starts something that starts off with like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do and I'm gonna do it. You know, when ego is not involved in the process of decision making. But by the time you've actually started action in this thing, by the time you're actually sharing it with others, ego would have had its little vines tightly wrapped around it, you know? And this is where the boxes thing comes in because ego thrives in boxes because,
mm,
oh, I am a this and this is how I'm going to behave because this is what I am, you know? Um, one way that I've seen how others' ego interact with like people's identity is that um I'll use an example. Like when I was vegan, people would introduce me as, oh, look at Lilia, the vegan. And I'm like,
Mm. Yeah, it's like,
guys, that's
hold
not my
on.
identity. Like,
Yeah, hold on.
don't put that on me.
Yeah, and actually let you decide for yourself. No, let you decide what parts of your identity you want to reveal to people. People
Mm,
need to leave room for that rather than making that decision for you, you know?
self-determination. And yeah, is self-determination the right word? This
No,
ability
I
for
don't
us
think
to
so.
self-label. No, it's not the
Yeah.
word. Self-label, because I think there's so much power in being able to self-label. Because if I say to you, I am this, if I say to you that I'm queer, you can't now label me as something else because I've told you what I am, you know? So this is what is really, I
Yeah,
mean,
but that's the thing as well. When you tell people certain labels, they once you move beyond that and you see yourself in a new light, hold on to an old label that you might
mm,
have what's the word? That you might have associated yourself with. So people get stuck on certain labels and
yeah.
don't leave that room for change and stuff.
See, I think the more that I learn, the more that I see that that's not my responsibility, because once I've moved from that label and I've communicated, whether I've communicated it or not, but the minute that I bring up a different label or a different calling or naming or whatever, like you should just follow, you know. And this is where
Mm.
sometimes this is why it's so important to pick the right people around us, because you need people that will affirm every part of you, every label you decide to use.
That sounds like a good theme song, I think. But that's the
God.
thing. Actually, you need people around you who don't see you in as a label. Don't see you
Mm,
as
beyond. They see the
yeah.
beyond.
They see yeah.
I don't normally like to be perceived, but there's certain people that once they perceive me, I'm like, oh, I like
What do you
this.
mean by that?
Like, because when people are looking at you, they project onto you, right? And
Mm.
sometimes what you interact with is not, you're not interacting, the people are not interacting with you, they're interacting with ideas of you, they're interacting with what they have projected onto you to be, you know. So there's certain people, the interaction is free from projections, and so that, yeah, there's, it's free from projections, and it's really hard to get to the point where you're interacting with someone for free from projections, because that requires you to put your guard down, to put your walls down, to be quite vulnerable.
And not play into certain aspects of your of what you identify as.
Yeah, of what you think you should be showing up as, you know. Because it's really easy, it's
Mm.
really easy to play into projections, because especially if you're like, there's two people like me and you right now, right? It's very
Mm.
easy to then behave in a way that I think that you think I should behave,
Mm.
you know what I mean? um in the same way that it's easy for you to then try to behave in a way that you think I think you should behave.
Whoa,
So
that's Matrix kind of stuff. I got to get my head around that. So say that again. You
okay,
think, I think.
all right, so behaving in a way that's like, well, I'll use us as an example, right?
Hmm.
I'm your older sister, right? So it's easy for me to play into the role of like, I need to behave the way that an older sister should behave. Because to you yourself, you've got an idea of what an older sister should be like, right? So
Right.
it's easy for me to be like, okay, what is the proper way of them being an older sister? And then trying to play into that which I think you have an idea of.
Right.
This is, are you following?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So then, yeah, so then instead of then behaving or showing up from a point of authenticity, hey Maya, look at this. It's a mouthful, leave me alone. Instead of playing from that, it's then playing from like roles, from like roles that we have ascribed to. Eesh, look at this English. The English is not English in today, but it's all right. Yeah, so then, for instance, I think some of the conversations that we have, I don't think I would have been able to have them before this. When
Right.
we speak quite candidly on a lot of things, right? And I think there's a certain point, or there's a part before where I was like, I'm not going to talk to my sister about things on the
Why is
phone.
that?
On my,
Why is
I
that?
never had an older sister, so I never knew what older sisters should talk about. To
Mm.
so it's it's almost like you take on the role of being like like a younger mom, right? Um, rather than behaving as me. I'm now trying to behave as like a younger version of your mom, where there's like the boundaries are quite like, I'll talk to you about these 5 things and these 5 things only.
Mm.
Are you following?
Right. I'm following.
Yeah.
I am
So
following. Following and thinking what I think.
are you processing?
Yeah, I'm processing.
Go on. I'd like to hear your reflections.
Do you think that why do you think that you thought it was appropriate to to act as an older mum? Where did that come from? Is that
Mm,
the only way you knew how to relate to somebody who's close to you, another woman in your family? Or that's how you've
um,
seen people relate to you, so you thought that's the most appropriate thing?
I think it's just because it was just the role that I had anyway. So then it was just a continuation of that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So
Yeah. So
not even
you
okay.
say
Take away from, huh?
you feel like you had that younger mum role
Yeah,
initially.
yeah, yeah. Initially. Now, okay. So
But
now
when it was time for it to evolve, you thought that you should carry it on, you should carry on
I
that
didn't
role.
think. I just carried it on. I just carried
Mm,
it on because at that point it's like, do you remember when we used to argue all the time, all the time,
man
all the
used to
time?
scrap me.
Oh my gosh. I remember the mark that you left me on my arm and I went mad. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so you left a handprint on my hand and
No, I didn't.
I
That
lost it.
didn't
I lost
happen.
it. Dad had to get involved.
That's so
I
funny.
lost it.
No, yeah, because you lot underestimate me. That's it.
I flipping lost it, mate. Okay, so now take us out of that
Mm,
equation, right? And then think about how that might play out in other places and other spaces when it comes to trying to relate to others, when it comes to um, building community, when it comes to that communion with others. Um, a lot of us don't even think about how we're showing up, and we don't think about how whether these relationships need to evolve, whether these relationships need to move, how we're showing up in these relationships. So we continue showing up in ways that are not sufficient. Well, I don't know if that's the right terminology, but
yeah. But then how can you be present if you're always having to think about how you should show up?
it's not necessarily a thinking thing where it's a constant thinking thing, but like, um,
But you have to make the space to think about it.
yeah, it has to be a conscious decision. And I think that sometimes consciousness or conscious decisions don't involve you thinking on a loop. um, Sometimes it just means, okay, I'm going to step back from this. Me as me, the ego is going to step back from this and I'll let
Mm.
spirit lead this. um, to just see, because I think sometimes ego, not I think, but ego does um, put a veil on us, masks. It masks us. It asks us to put up, to show a mask in whatever way that we're showing up, because then it wants to be liked by others. It wants to be received in a particular
Mm.
way. Um,
Mm.
so by removing that, yeah, by removing that, we're able to give the relationships um, what they need rather than what we think they need.
We think they need.
Yeah.
So when you say what they need and what they think they need, the difference between those two sentences semantically is the addition of the word think.
Mm.
So do you think the first one comes from inspired action, comes from connecting with spirit, source, God, whatever you want it to be. And the second one is you holding on to and controlling, using your mind to control what you think should happen next.
Mm. Yeah, basically. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Because I think ego gives us a false, this false idea that we can control things, including how others like perceive us. I'm gonna turn this into like, okay, so for instance, right? Sometimes ego will have our pause so its pause so deeply into this idea of self that we have that
Mm.
even when we're trying to express um even when we're trying to express ourselves to others, ego would then stop that because it's like, how will they perceive you? And of course sometimes we have to think about, is this safe for me to be, especially if we're talking about like LGBT plus identities, it's not always safe to express the truest versions of who we are in all the spaces, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like, when it comes to like communicating with others, people that our our friends and people that love us and people that want to learn us, um, ego can still really have us held down. I speak from, so in I meet all sorts of people. I've seen a lot of like things, and I see things. Anyway, so basically, what I'm trying to say is that sometimes you have someone who's like trans masculine, right? And they don't feel like they can express or even like explore femininity within them, because then they think that that will like their trans masculineness would then be devalued if they then explore the feminine sides of them.
Right.
And
Right.
so they continue to box themselves in that, because then that becomes inaccessible to them.
Mm-hmm.
You dig?
Yes.
Mm.
And what's the solution to that? Or do you just hold space for people to express that? Maybe they might not be able to articulate it in the way that you did, but you
I
don't
think,
think about advice, you just think about.
oh, I don't think about advices. They think about, I think the most important thing is to hold space for people to speak their truth, because there's, as people, we always want, when someone opens up and speaks their truth, we want to be like, have you thought about this solution?
Yeah, I want
Do
to
you
give
want my
advice.
advice? Because
Yeah.
this is what I think. And I think that sometimes that's not always very helpful. And
Mhm.
when you create that space for people to express themselves, I think the versions that then present themselves are the most beautiful, like, insight into someone's soul, parts that
Yeah, because you always say that you feel like people don't aren't listened to and aren't heard
mm,
often.
yeah, I that would be literally the hill that I die on. A lot of people do not get seen, they don't get heard, and it's, if I can create a space where someone, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's like an hour, where they feel seen, where they feel heard, where
Mhm.
a part of their soul can be expressed, I think that that's magical. That's really magical.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, because I mean, self distrust is something that is encouraged in our society. Self
Yeah, the
hatred, self
advertising
doubt. Yeah.
or it's always like, oh, what you've chosen for yourself right now isn't what you should have. It's you can choose a better life, make a better decision by going with our product.
Mm. Everything is
And
geared to buy you, to sell you something.
yeah, and at
Everything,
the root of that is breaking down your sense of self and breaking down um your truth
basically.
and making you feel inadequate.
I think the most important thing that we can do as people is to really know thyself.
And on that note,
I know. I know. No, no, no. But okay, let me say it in actual words. Is take the time to actually get to know who we are beyond this projection
mm,
of others, because I think
but that's the thing, though.
mm,
From my perspective, you hear people say stuff like that, but some people don't know where to start. Okay, how do I do that then if I'm not sure where to start?
How do you start? I think intentionality is something that is overlooked a lot. I think sometimes the thing that you can do first and foremost is have that intention to know yourself. Um, yeah, have that intention to know yourself.
Mm.
How do you get to know others? Apply the way that you get to know others onto self. Whether, but then
Mm.
obviously you can't be talking to yourself. I mean, you can do. You can
You
record
can.
yourself and talk to yourself on the webcams, and you know, um, not on a webcam because on photo booth. Um, you can record yourself and then play that back because sometimes you have like these insights that if you're not actually thinking about them, they won't get to vocalize, they won't get the voice that they
Mm.
need. So even by then, like recording yourself, writing, I think writing is an amazing one as well.
Journaling something.
There you go. Journaling, creativity. I think creativity, just being creative, just letting things come from you and then exploring from there. But that intentionality, I think sometimes that's the one thing that we can ask for people, for them to be intentional with getting to know themselves. And it starts to come. It starts to come. And then you start to realize just how much noise is around you. And then when you start to realize how much noise is around you, you start to realize also that what you thought was your personality is actually an accumulation of all the projections that people have like cast onto you, you know.
Mm.
And once you're then able to start from that, you can start to unpack yourself, you can start to then see what fits, what doesn't fit. But then again, that's also knowing yourself is also like a lifelong commitment, you know, because yes, labels are important for to let people know who you are in spaces, but then they're not the you're not your label.
Oh, I've really enjoyed this conversation.
On
It's
that
gone
note,
it's gone in all different directions. You are not your label. That's the conclusion. I think that last sentence summed it up perfectly.
yeah.
Labels help us understand the world, but you are not your label. That sounds like a good tattoo. That's what that's what those adverts should be saying, not just labels are meant for bottles, not for
You're not your
people.
label. You're more than that. Because
Yeah.
sometimes I think we okay. Anyway, let's end it with that. That can start. We can do another one about how yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed our show. It's been Toa.
And Lilia.
I'm
I don't know what that was.
keeping it in there.
Join us next week as we keep getting into it, having those open and honest conversations.
And this week, try and journal something. Try and find out something about yourself that you didn't know. So
And next week we're gonna open our journals and read out of them.
I rebuke that. I rebuke that. Well, thank you
That's
so much. And yeah, so that's been our show.